Okay, we are at the bottom of Ches Amid Beis, the last two sections which deal with the checking of a storage house. And this is particularly the wine storage, the wine cellar. So the Mishnah says of Amru Shtei Shuras b'Martev. In regards to what did we say? 2 rows in the Martev in a wine storage area. And the Gemara is going to ask, who mentioned a wine storage area? They're asking about it. I mean, there is no mention about a Martev. So the Gemara says, Martev man l'char shmei. Where is there a mention of Martev that you're asking about? That you're asking about a Martev? Hachi kama. So the Gemara says, this is what it means. The Mishnah means to say that any place that you do has said, and therefore any place that you don't put chametz into a place, you actually don't need to check for chametz. Well, and wine storage and oil storage also doesn't need, as we said before, if it's not the type that you actually check for, go to get supply from during a meal. However, if it is something that you do check, do get your supplies from, you have to check it. So then where do we say that you do have to check the 2 rows in a wine storage area? A place that you may bring chametz into. What is that? It's a type of wine cellar that you're actually getting food from in the middle of the meal. And to that, Beishami Amr Shtei Shuras. Beishami said that you need to do 2 rows. Which 2 rows of barrels? So they would have the jugs or barrels laying in rows, and from the floor up to the ceiling, and then another row in front of that, floor to ceiling, and another row in front of that, floor to ceiling. So what did it mean when it said 2 rows? Which 2 rows are we talking about? Two full rows on the surface, the front of your storage area, from the floor to the ceiling. And Rabbi Yochanan says, no, it's in a gamma shape, it's in an upside down L shape. So the full row in front and the full row at the top. And we have a brisa concurring with each. Tanik Avasei Rabbi Yehuda, Tanik Avasei Rabbi Yochanan, Tanik Avasei Rabbi Yehuda. We have a brisa concurring with Rabbi Yehuda. Beishamei Omrim Shtei Shuras Alpanei Kol Martev. Beishamei says 2 rows in front of the Martev, in front of the wine storage area. Shtei Shuras Sha'amru Mina Aretz Vat Shtei Shmei Korah. And these 2 rows that we're talking about are Shtei Shuras, 2 rows from the earth, from the ground to the ceiling. Tanik Avasei Rabbi Yochanan. We have a brisa concurring with Rabbi Yochanan. Shtei Shuras Alpanei Kol Martev Chitzona. 2 rows that we said in the Martev, in the wine storage, in the cellar, is the outer row, Royav Pesach, that can see the opening, as well as El Yona, the upper one, Roya Sakura, that sees the roof, the ceiling. However, what's below it or in front or behind it do not need checking. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, the 2 rows in front from top to bottom need to be checked, and according to Rabbi Yochanan, the front row and the top row need to be checked because he may come and take from the top, or he may take from the front. Either way, he could have put his chametz down there as he was checking, as he was going to get his wine. So that's the opinion of Beis Shammai, according to Rav Yehuda and Rabbi Yochanan. However, Beis Hillel say, no, it's only 2 rows, not the entire front and the entire top, or rather a top row, which is the outer row. The top rows, which are the outer rows. What does that mean? Amar Rav, and Rav says, Al Yona v'Shalamata Mena, the top row and the row beneath it. Shmuel Amar, El Yona v'Shalafnei Mena. And Shmuel says, the top row and the one behind it. My time of the Rav. So Rav it sees his in the language of Bisham Hillel, because it says the kachitzonos. It says the outer rows, so it's going to be the outer row and the one below it. But it also says the upper, right? To tell you to tell you not further down, only the top two rows, not all the way down to the ground. And Shmuel says the upper one and the one that's within it, but not below. My time it the Elyonis, because it says, look, after all, we saw that it says Elyonis, the upper one, the upper ones. But it also says the outer one. Yeah, that's to tell you you don't have to go any further in. The mute to tell you not the inner of the inner. Rabbi Chia Tani Kavasei, the Rav Chia taught like Rav, the Kul Tanai Tanu Kavasei the Shmuel. However, all of the Chachamim, they taught like Shmuel, the Hilchas Kavasei the Shmuel, and the halacha is indeed like Shmuel. We come to today's daf to Tes, and we're going to begin a new subject matter. This is what is called a Shas Sugya, a subject matter that really is fundamental throughout Shas, and really we're only going to touch the surface on this daf, and much of the halacha that's needed for understanding this daf shows up everywhere else. The question over here is, when does a chazaka, when can we establish something as having a certain status, and when does that status change, or do we stick with status quo? As well as the concepts of suffix, doubt, safek sveka, a doubt of a doubt, suffix v'suffix. You have a doubt going one way and a doubt of anything changing that would cause it to go the other way. Suffix uvadai, you have an established a status that you know of, and then a suffix, a doubt changing that, as well as, if we get to it today at the end of the daf, the concepts of holchin achararov, that you can assume that something comes from a majority, even though that there's a chance that it would come from the minority. So the topic specifically is talking about when you check the place for chametz. So up until now, we were talking about the obligation of checking for chametz, but you checked for chametz, and now you have reason to be concerned that there's chametz where you already checked. Namely, you see an animal come and take some of the chametz that you had, or some of your neighbor's chametz, and run into your house. A weasel, a rat, a mouse, etc., took some of the chametz and runs into the house, into the room, into the area that you just checked. The Gemara says, and the Mishnah says, Ein choshishin shemagira rechulda. You don't have to be concerned. Maybe a chulda, a weasel, took some chametz and brought it into the room. Mibayis labayis, whether from one room to another, mi makom lamakom, from one space within a room to another. Why don't you have to be concerned about this? Imkain michatzer lechatzer, because if so, even from one courtyard to another, from one city to another, and there's going to be no end to it. And so you don't need to be concerned about this, because there would be no end. There are two ways of taking this. Does it mean it's not a logical concern, or it is a concern, but since you could never end this concern, and therefore Chazal said, just don't worry, it's true. Maybe they brought chametz into here, or somehow chametz got in, but you did your part and that's it. Is that the way to read the Mishnah, or do we read the Mishnah saying that no, it's not a logical concern because of the impossibility of the other side? If you're going to be concerned, then there's just no end. Either case, the Mishnah says You do not have to be concerned. You check for chametz, and that's sufficient. Timer de lechazina. So the Gemara does make an inference from the Mishnah. The Mishnah begins and says you don't have to be concerned that perhaps an animal brought chametz into the house. So it's only if you didn't actually see it. The lechazina de shaka, we didn't see that it brought chametz in. Hachazina de shaka chashina. But if you did see the chametz being dragged in by a rodent, then you do have to be concerned that it's still there. And you have to recheck that home. Va'amai. And why do you have to? Why is that? Nema achalase. Why can't you assume if it schlepped the chametz in, then it would have eaten it by now? Mila tanan. Didn't we learn medura sa'akim? This is a halacha of the concept of tamei mace, a home being tamei because it came into contact with a deceased, or actually not a contact, there's a deceased within it. And this is in the case of where it used to be in those days that women who had a miscarriage for superstitious reasons, they would bury the fetus in the house, and that would be tamei mace, assuming that the fetus was past 40 days of gestation. It becomes a fetus, and then it would cause tuma, and therefore you have to assume that dwellings of these idolaters would be tamei, would have the tuma of a deceased. And the Gemara says that the Mishnah teaches Madura sa'akim tamei. You have to assume that there's tuma, there is a deceased, meaning a fetus, in a home of an akum. V'kama yisha, and how long do they have to be living there in order to assume that there could be a fetus in the home? That you would have to then check to see whether or not there's a fetus there. 40 days. And even if this person that is living there has no wife, nevertheless, the assumption is that it's possible that they would have someone who's not officially a wife come live there and become pregnant and have a miscarriage, and that it would be buried in the house. However, but wherever there are weasels or pigs that are maybe hanging around, you don't have to check, because the assumption is that they would then consume that and rid the home of the fetus, the tumah. So we see that even though that there is an assumption that the fetus would be there, there's an assumption that the weasel would eat it. So why over here are you assuming that the weasel would not eat it, and that you have to check the house again for chametz? And Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Zeir lekasha. Rabbi Zeir says you can't compare the two. Hababasar, habalechem. That's talking about meat, right? It's talking about a flesh, and so these animals would eat it. And even though that perhaps tougher meats they wouldn't, but this is a fetus. It's soft. It's easy. They would eat it. But bread, we're talking about breads. Breads, we can't assume that we eat it. But basal and mishaira, meat, they would consume it all and leave nothing. By belechem mishaira, by bread, they could leave some of it, and then you're going to have chametz in the house. Amar Rava. So Rava challenged the question from its start. I said, I don't understand the comparison. Haima, what is this question? Bishlam mahasam, Emer hava, Emer lahava. There, we actually don't even know if there was a fetus there, if there was any reason for concern. Just out of doubt, we're considering perhaps there is a fetus there, and so before you go in, you have to check in order to know whether or not there's a fetus there. The imtim tzalei mahava. Therefore, even if you say that it was there, ema chalase. Therefore, there's a possibility it was eaten. So that's a double doubt. Number one, I don't even know if there was anything there to begin with, and even if it was, it may have been consumed now. So I have two reasons to assume that there's no concern. Or the way to say it is it's a suffix, the suffix. There's a doubt if there ever was a problem, and there could be that there's a solution to the problem. But over here, we know for sure that there was a problem. We saw the weasel bring this chametz back into the house. There we have a question, only a single question. Did the animal eat it? So we know for sure there's an established reason to say that there is chametz in the home, and it's only a question of whether it was consumed already by them. Have a suffix uvadai. That's a doubt against an established knowledge. So that in suffix motzi midei vadai. Perhaps here we're going to say ein suffix, a doubt cannot motzi midei vadai, change the status of something that is for sure, that is certain. So Rava says we cannot compare the two cases. There, it's a doubt whether or not there is the problematic subject, and even if there is, it could be that there is a remedy that it was already eaten. Here, we know for sure that it's there. It's just a question of whether or not it was eaten, and that's why, in our case, you'd have to recheck. And now the Gemara challenges: is that really true? That if you have an established status, that you cannot assume with a doubt to remove that certainty that you have. The ein suffix motzi midei vadai. A doubt cannot cast doubt on a certainty enough to create a doubt. Ein suffix motzi midei vadai. We know it wouldn't remove the certainty the other way to make it certain it's not there, but at least it can cast the doubt. And you're saying that it doesn't cast the doubt; it remains certain. Ein suffix motzi midei vadai. A doubt cannot remove a certainty. Well, why not? Well, Tani we learn, and we have a brisa that would seem to indicate you can't. Chaver shames. We saw this earlier. A chaver is someone who is established to keeping halacha well, and this person died. And we find that they left a chest full of produce. And even if we are certain that this was harvested today, and he passed away, nevertheless, we assume that all the tithes were taken properly. And why is that? Because he's a chaver, because he's someone who's strict on keeping halacha, and therefore we can assume that these are tithe. But from the start, the status is for sure that it was untithed, which is called tevel. No teruma or maser had been taken from there. Hani peri, these produce are untithed, and yet suffix musar. It's only a doubt of whether or not he got a chance to tithe these. But there's a chance that it was not tithed. And yet the doubt is going to be sufficient to remove the certainty of tevel that these are untithed, and we can assume now that they are tithed. Umar says, actually, no. Your certainty is not that certain, and your doubt is not just a doubt. So first of all, it says hasam vade vadehu. Just as you have the certainty that it was tevel, so too you have the certainty that he fixed that and tithed it. Why is that? Here it's a vade as well. The vade ma'asri, for sure he would have tithed it. Could Rabbi Chanina Chuzah, like Rabbi Chanina Chuzah said, Rabbi Chanina Chuzah chazaka al chava shemetzim mitachas yadei davar she'eino masukan. There's a chazaka. There's an established norm that a chaver would not let something out of his hands, would not put it into that chest, would not set it aside until it is fixed. He will not let something leave his hands until it is masukan, until it is done properly. Chazaka al chava she'eino mitachas yadei davar she'eino masukan. He will not take something out of his hands that is not fixed, set in the right way, and therefore it's not just a doubt. Maybe he tithed it. It's a certainty that he tithed it. There's a certain established norm that we can rely upon to determine this certainty. And even though that he died and it was harvested that day, we can assume that it was indeed tithe, and that would be sufficient to remove the certainty that it once was tevel untithed produce, as opposed to over here where you don't have in regards to chametz, you don't have a certainty that it would have eaten it. The weasel would eat this. It's only that it may eat it. For sure, the chametz was there. A doubt whether or not it was eaten, and that's why it would require rechecking. Viva Yisema, or perhaps suffix to suffix. Actually, both of these cases are a suffix. It's not even that certain that it ever was obligated in tithing, that it ever was tevel. Dilmami kara ema tavili. Perhaps it never really was. It came into being tevel, into being obligated in tithing, even though that it is finished produce now. And generally, we say produce like this is obligated in checking. Nevertheless, could Rabbi Yeshaya, Rabbi Yeshaya, like Rabbi Yeshaya said, Ma'arim Adam al Tavuas, a person can find a workaround on his produce, and bring it into the house while it still has its chaff on, and this way it never became obligated in tithing, because in order to be obligated in tithing, you have to remove its chaff, and it has to be a finished product and come into the house in that way. And if you brought it in when it wasn't a completed produce, so then it never became obligated in tithe. And why would he do so? This way his animal can eat and not be obligated in the tithe. Because halacha is that on a Torah level, it has to be a dagan, it has to be completed produce, meaning the process has to be complete, and then you bring it into the house in a normal way, and then it becomes obligated in Maaseh. Prior to that, if you didn't do it in that manner, animals can eat regardless, and humans can eat just ba'arai, just on occasion, but not properly. You still have to tithe it midirabanan. Rabbinically, there's an obligation to tithe it, so as not to do this workaround in a keva eating. You couldn't properly eat it. In any case, what we see is that people would sometimes do this in order to feed their animals, even though they still have to tithe it rabbinically for human consumption and a proper human consumption. The idea is that we now don't have a certainty that it ever was really obligated in Maaser. So we're not really certain, because there is a workaround, and whether there was a workaround that it doesn't become obligated in Maaser. So we're not sure that he was obligated, and we also have a great degree of certainty that he would have tithed it before allowing it to leave his hands, and therefore they are equal. And the chazaka, the strength of the status of the chaver to tell us that he would have tithed it is sufficient to say that there is no longer any doubt, even though that there was some level of certainty that it would have been obligated in tithing, but there was also a chance that it wasn't, and that's sufficient. But generally, we're still back to a doubt is not sufficient to cast doubt on something that we're certain about. Again, the Gemara is going to challenge that. Is that true, that a doubt cannot cast doubt on a certainty? We learned Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda said, there was a story with the maidservant of a certain gangster, a certain difficult person, Berimon, in a place called Rimon. Shetila nefilabot, that she had a miscarriage and into a pit. We turn to 9b now, Tessalmud base, and a kohen came and he came to check Leda to see im zacharum nekevi, to see whether the fetus that was miscarried into this pit was a male or a female, because that would change how long she has to be tameh before she is obligated in bringing her korban, her afterbirth korban. And this kohen shouldn't have done this, because if there was a fetus in there and he leaned over to check what it was, he would be tameh mace. He would become tameh on account of the deceased, the fetus that's in there. And this story came before the Chachamim, and they said he doesn't have to be tamei, this kohen, even though he leaned over the pit to look what was in there. He's not assumed to be tamei, having leaned over a deceased. Because the weasel or a bardalis, it seems some sort of large cat, not large cat like a lion, but a large home cat that would be around, and they would have eaten it by then. They are around, and therefore he doesn't have to assume that he became tummy, that he leaned over a deceased. The Gemara says, why not? We know there's a certainty that she had a miscarriage into this pit. And there's only a doubt of whether or not these animals may have taken that fetus away. So at that moment, there's a question of whether or not it was there or not, but it was a certainty that it was there to begin with. And this doubt of whether an animal took it away by then, it's going to challenge and cast doubt on the certainty that we had beforehand. And it's no longer certain. It can remove the certainty that we had because of the doubt that we have afterwards. The Gemara says, actually, no, generally we would not say that. If you have a certainty, you have to assume that's the case until you know that it changed. And a doubt would not be sufficient to change the established certainty. However, our story is not that she actually had a fetus, that she actually had a miscarriage. But it was like a miscarriage, meaning halachically, an embryo before 40 days of gestation does not have a halachic status of a fetus, does not have a halachic status of a human. And therefore, it may be, yes, she did miscarry in that moment, but was there a miscarried fetus there? Was there a nafel? Or was it just a sack with air in it? Now, obviously not air, with liquids, with molecules, with cells that are splitting, but that would not count as a nafel of a fetus, a human. Shapila kamin nafel abor, v'hava safek asafek, and therefore there's a doubt to begin with. There was no certainty. It was uncertain whether or not there was a fetus there, and even if there was a fetus there, perhaps it was removed already by one of these animals. And where it says, wait, but it says in the Brisa that the story was that the Kohen went to check whether it was male or female, and now you're telling me we're not even sure whether or not it was there. The Brisa taught that it was a question whether or not it was male or female. What the Brisa means, this Kohen went to check, A, was it already a fetus, or was it still just air, meaning an embryo? And even if you're going to tell us that it was a nafel, that it already was enough to cause tumah. We want to know how long that tumah would be, male or female. So again, in this version, we're going to say that, of course, if there was a solid certainty that something was there, the doubt of whether an animal removed it would not be sufficient to remove the halachic doubt, halachic certainty. And therefore, just like over there, the Kohen would be tamei, so to here, the chametz is now in the home because an animal brought it back in. You have to check the house, recheck the house for chametz. And the doubt that maybe the animal ate it is not sufficient to remove the certainty that the animal brought it back in. V'iba yasema, or perhaps asam vade vade. There, it's a greater degree of certainty than it is to in regards to chametz. Yes, it's true. We are certain that the chametz was brought back into the house by the animal, and yes, it's true that there's a certainty that this woman had a miscarriage and there was a fetus in the pit. However, kivan the chulda of a badlus mitzvim sham. Once you have a weasel or an animal there, vaday giraru b'hishaita. For sure, by the time the Kohen leaned over, it was removed by one of these animals. Because it's true they wouldn't have consumed it all, but they would for sure have removed it already and pulled it out into their holes, into somewhere that they would run away with it, and so it wouldn't still be there. In our case, we're not doubting whether or not they may pull it into somewhere, but they would not have consumed it. In both places, the doubt is whether they would have consumed it, and that we cannot be certain that they would have consumed it, and that's why you have to check for chametz. But it's a vadai. It's certain that they would have removed it at that point. That's a greater certainty. Now back to our Mishnah. So our Mishnah, Rava said, Rava said that in our case it was a certainty that the chametz was there if we saw that the animal brought it back in. But as our Mishnah says, but we're not concerned that maybe it would have brought it in. And you don't have to recheck. The Gemara says, is that really true? But let's look at the next Mishnah. The next Mishnah tells us, Masha Mashayar, what do you do with the chametz that you leave over? So you check for chametz on the night before Pesach. And as our custom is, you put out a few chametz pieces, hopefully in a bag so it doesn't leave crumbs everywhere, right? So you put out some chametz pieces, you find them, or you leave yourself a bagel for the morning so you can have some breakfast before you part with chametz for a week. And you left some food over for the morning. What should you do with that food to make sure that it's still there? So whatever you leave over after you check for chametz and you find the chametz and you put it aside, you have to put them away. So the part that you're going to burn and the part that you're going to eat, so you don't have to check it afterwards, because maybe you're going to have to recheck if you wake up in the morning and some of the chametz that you put away is not there. Amar Abaye lekasha. So you see, 1 second. So from there you see that there is an obligation to make sure that the chametz doesn't come back into the house. That there is a concern that if you didn't put it away properly, you just left it around, there's a concern that maybe a weasel would come and take it. So that's why you have to put it in a special place. Abaye says, well, there's a distinction. On the night of the 14th, if you checked on the night of the 14th, there's not a lot of chametz being made, not a lot of bread being made, and therefore the weasel is not going to consume it all. It's going to leave it so that it has some chametz throughout Pesach. But if you checked on the 13th because you were traveling out of town or whatever it is, and so you checked the night before, there the weasel is not concerned that there's no chametz remaining, and therefore it will consume it all because it knows tomorrow there's more. On the 13th, there's still more bread available. Yeah, so bekulibati in all other homes, so it's not going to hide it. But on the 14th, the loshchicha rifta bekulibati, there's no bread left in all the houses. They're cleaning them out, and this weasel goes from home to home, can't find anything. Yeah, rats running from place to place, it can't find any chametz. So mitznah, so it's going to leave some of the chametz left over. Amar Rava, so Rava respond, but this weasel's a prophet. She knows that there's no bread going to be made the next morning, and therefore is saving the chametz. It doesn't make sense. The yada de inna arbesa, it knows that today's the 14th, and that there's no fresh bread going to be made until the evening, umashaira metamra, and it's going to leave it over and hide it in the house. Rava here did a play on words, because as we know, there are 7 prophetesses in Tanakh that are mentioned, and Huldah is one of them. So Huldah Hanaviyah, there is a prophetess called Huldah. And so Rava played on word and said, is the Huldah Naviyah? Is the Huldah the prophet? Yeah. The first pun in Daf Yomi is here in Pesachim, Daf Tes. Elam Rava, rather Rava says that that's not the issue. Masha Mashayach and Betzina, the reason why you have to put your chametz away the night of the 14th is not because maybe if you leave it on the counter, an animal will come and get it, because that wouldn't be sufficient to check. But the problem is that maybe the rat will take it in front of us. And you're going to have to check it. It's not that there is an animal that's going to come when we're not watching, and you're going to have to, out of doubt, recheck the house. No, in doubt, you don't have to recheck the house because you have already an established norm that you've checked the house, and you don't know that changed, so you don't have to check it. It's only if you see the animal taking the chametz in the house, there you have an established norm, the certainty that the chametz came back into the house, and now you have to check it because you're in doubt whether or not it would have eaten it. Tanik of Aseder Rava, and indeed the Brisa concurs with Rava. It says it explicitly. Somebody who wants to leave some chametz so that he has what to eat in the morning after he's checked the house the 14th at night. No, sorry, the 13th at night, the night of the 14th. What should he do? What he leaves over, he must put away in a way that is secure. So there should not see an animal come and take it in front of us and run off with it. And then you're going to be required to check for chametz again. Rav Mari Amar Gezerah Shema Yenuach Eser V'Yimsa Tesha. Rav Mari says there's another issue. Even if you didn't see the animal take it from you, there's a way that you can have a serious doubt and assumption that chametz is back in the house. Why? If I had 10 pieces of bread that I put away for the morning after the Bedika, we had one for breakfast. We had 10 pieces. Well, I wake up in the morning and there's 9. Now I know something happened. Right? You saw nibbling at the bag, and one piece of bread is missing. There's only 9 where you left 10. There you have a certainty that chametz is around the house. And now I don't know whether it was pulled out of the house or left in the house, whether it was eaten or not. So again, I have certainty that there's one piece of chametz that went missing in the house. And I have a doubt of whether or not that became consumed. That's where that's why you have to. The next Mishnah tells us you have to put it away in a protected way, because you may actually see the evidence that there's chametz roaming around. The next section is a classic halachic question about. It's called Tesha Chanuyos, 9 shops, and the question is, there are 2 concepts in halacha. There's a concept called kol kavua kemechza al mechza. Anything that's in its place is 50-50. That means if I have 10 shops that are lined up in a row, competitors sitting right next to each other, each one of them selling meat. 9 of them sell kosher meat, and 1 sells non-kosher meat. I walk into a shop and I didn't check beforehand which one I walked into, and I purchase some meat. The meat there is 50% kosher, 50% not kosher, not percentage-wise, but to me it's an equal doubt, and that's called kavua kemechza mechza. If it's in its place, it's 50-50. However, if in front of those shops I find a package of meat, that meat is going to be assumed kosher, because there are 9 places it could have come from that were kosher, 1 not. We can assume that's kosher. That's holchen acharov. You can follow the majority. This is a halachic concept. The reasons for it are the subject of so much writing and explanation. But in short, that should suffice for a Daf Yomi. Quick cruising over this is when I'm in that shop, I cannot include in my doubt any of the other shops because I'm in this shop. And therefore, the only doubt I have is this kosher or not? That's a 50-50. When anything is outside of the shops, then it could have come from any of them. And therefore, I have a right to holchen acharov, to follow the majority. But the halachic idea is kavua, when you're why is it only 50-50 in a shop you know to be kosher? No, if I know I walked in the kosher shop, there's no doubt. I just don't remember where I walked into. I didn't check and say, did I walk into shop A, B, or C? I don't remember which one I walked into, and I didn't check. I just hopped out of my car, ran into one of the shops to buy some meat. Your question is right. If I knew I walked into whichever shop it is, that's kosher, for sure, there's no question. If I know it's kosher, there's no question. The question is if I don't know. I don't know. I just bought this meat, and I'm not like, is this the kosher shop or is the one non-kosher shop or is it one of the kosher shops? It's 50-50. It's either kosher meat or it's not kosher meat. It's either the kosher shop or the non-kosher shop. I can't include the other stores in there because I'm in this one. Whereas if it's outside, it can come from any one of them. In any case, this is a concept of holchin acharov when there's a separation. But when it's in its place, it's always kavua kemechza mechza. If it's in its place, it's as if it's 50-50. So, teisha tziburin shel matzah ve'echad shel chametz. I have 10 packages of breads. Each one of them has, a number of breads in them. 9 of them are kosher lePesach. They are matzah, and 1 is chametz. V'asa achbar, and I see a rat, a mouse, come v'shakal, and it takes one from within those packages. V'lo yadin ani matzah shakal chametz shakal, but I don't know if it took matzah or chametz. As we mentioned earlier, their matzah and chametz look pretty much the same. Their breads were very flat, and these flat breads that we throw on the sides of the oven. And their matzah was not cracker-like; it was softer, like a tortilla or a pita. So they looked similar enough, and we saw the animal run off, and you couldn't tell, was it kosher for Pesach or was it chametz? Hainu tesha chanuyos. That's the same as the 9 shops. Piresh v'asa achbar v'shakal. If one of the breads fell out of the packages onto the floor, now it's a separation. I don't know, did it come from the one of the 9 bags of matzah or 1 bag of chametz? V'asa achbar. And now an animal comes and runs off with it v'shakal. Hainu seifa. That's the end of that halacha. D'tanan, as we learned the halacha. Teisha chanuyos. You have 9 shops. Kula and mechem basa shchuta. They all sell kosher meat. Va'achas mecheres basa nevela. And one sells non-kosher meat. V'lakach at me'achas mehem. And you took meat. You walked into the shop and took meat from one of the shops. Ve'eno yedea. And you do not know me'ezem lakach. You didn't remember which shop you walked into. You don't remember which shop you walked out of. You just walked in, took some meat, paid, and walked out. That doubt is prohibited because there's a 50-50 chance that this is kosher. It's either kosher or it's not. Your doubt happened in the established place. Ubanimtza. However, if the doubt begins when it's already outside of one of these shops, you find it having already separated, halach acharov, that you can follow the majority. And so too here, when the bread fell onto the ground and then an animal pulled it away, so we can assume that it came from one of the matzah bags, the kosher for Pesach bags, and it's okay. However, if the animal went into the mix and took it, so there's a 50-50, and you have to assume that there is chametz in the house. Similarly, shnei tzibur and echad shel matzah v'echad shel chametz. 2 bundles equal. Now it's 50-50. 2 bundles, one is chametz, one is not. And you have 2 houses that in front of you. Echad badik v'echad she'eino badik. One house is checked for chametz already. One, the owner hasn't checked for chametz yet. So it's on the 14th in the evening. Person A says, I'm done checking for chametz. Person calls the neighbor. The neighbor says, oh, I'm just about ready to start checking for chametz. And then an animal comes, takes one of these breads, and runs off into one of the 2 houses. You couldn't see which one. Two rats come. Echad shakal matzah, echad shakal chametz. One took from the matzah bag, one took from the chametz bag. V'lo yadina, and we don't know which one went into the checked house and which one went into the non-checked house. Hainu shtei kupos. This is the halacha of 2 kupos, two baskets of produce. We'll learn this tomorrow, where we can say talinan, a new concept that we'll talk about tomorrow.